Well, you've caught me watering the garden here. I've got a really hot day. We had a hot day yesterday. It's gonna be another hot day today, up into the 90s. What you'll see in my watering the garden is that I don't really follow much of any of the conventional advice, partly because I'm lazy and partly maybe I have some cognitive dissonance on some of the conventional advice, and partly because my setup is just different than your average garden, being in this driveway garden. So figured we may as well talk about that. I actually was doing some research on watering to remind myself of what that conventional advice is, and I was gonna present kind of that research and kind of advice on how to water and all that, and kind of similar to what I did with slugs and caterpillars. I was gonna really go at it, but I couldn't relate to any of it. I mean, all of the research and the things it said to do are none of them are things that I actually do. So I thought it'd be disingenuous for me to present that research as here's what I'm doing if you wanted to do the same thing. And because my garden is unique in terms of being this driveway garden, unless you have a small space garden that is like mine in my way and has some of my unique challenges, I wouldn't recommend you necessarily do it my way, but you might kind of get some ideas or kind of learn kind of when and why sometimes things are not different in the garden, why conventional wisdom in gardening sometimes can be the wrong way to go or misleading, because not all gardens are the same or they have different issues. So first obvious thing here is that I'm just using a hose. And that's because the small driveway garden, I have a 100-foot hose connected down near my office on the driveway, at the bottom of the driveway, close to where the garage is, and I can reach the entire garden with this 100-foot hose. So I don't have to, and it's on one of those tractable mechanics, so I don't have to run around plugging in different hoses or having extensions or anything like that. So it's pretty convenient. So first off, just having this one long hose that can hit every portion of this garden is helpful and makes watering with the hose it gives kind of the first part of the convenience of being able to water with the hose. Obvious questions that would come up if you've done any kind of looking at watering in your garden is, well, why don't you use a drip system? Well, let's talk about that. I'll talk a little bit about why I don't use a drip system or other things. I'll talk a little bit more about other things that I've tried in the past and how I've gotten to just using the hose here in terms of what I do. But first, let me just kind of tell you where we're going with this watering. So I was back here in the back corner of the west side garden. Let me show you here. So this is the west side garden that you may have seen in my videos along the way. So I start in that back corner and then I go all the way along here first. That's usually how I do it anyway. And then once I've done that whole side, I've handled the whole west side, then I will go behind my truck. You can't see it easily from here, but behind my truck, sitting next to that fence, I've got still some brassica starts sitting out there. So I will water those, and then I will water the cherry tree bed there, and then I will walk up the path there, and I will go all the way down the path, watering all the pots and everything, all the way down to the potting bench, and then I'll come back, and then I will go down the driveway on the east side here, all the way back to where my office is at the bottom of the driveway where the garage is, and that's also where the hose originates, and then I'm done. And then at the bottom there, when I'm done, that's where all the seedlings in the holding area for all the various seedlings are that haven't been planted yet. Now that I've shown you my watering plan, I'm back here on the west side garden, and I figure I can talk you through my watering philosophy, or my half-baked, half-brained watering theories. One of the things that makes my garden different than what you might see in the average advice is that I'm gardening in a lot of containers here, and I've got these larger containers and I've got some smaller containers. And my goal, let's talk through kind of what I'm trying to achieve with the watering, and then we can talk about kind of the different methods and why I've defaulted to just using the hose. Keep the containers, the soil in the containers, moist, especially during the summer. And if the container was out on the driveway, you could see that you were doing that by putting enough water in the container to then see the water run out the bottom. I can't see that with these in here, so I'm just going by experience. The thing about containers, and this will sound obvious, but you may not have thought about it too much before, depending on how you garden, is that one of their fundamental differences from gardening in a raised bed or just in ground, being connected to the earth, is that they're not connected to the earth. And so when you garden in the ground or in raised beds and you're connected to the earth, you essentially have a built-in reservoir. You can do a deep watering. You can water a lot, and depending on how well your drainage works, you may be protected somewhat from overwatering, because the additional water, any overwatering, is just going to end up going deeper into the ground and building a reservoir that you might be able to pull from later, so to speak. You can certainly still smother the roots, suffocate the roots with overwatering if you really worked at it, or if you just had poor drainage in your in-ground beds. But it's you have a little bit of a buffer there. And likewise on the other side, you have a buffer of the fact that you can create a reservoir there. You can do a deep watering. You can create a reservoir, and that means you can actually do a watering plan where you're doing deep watering less often, once a week, maybe a couple times a week, maybe even less depending on your setup, and let your plants pull from that reservoir over time. But in these containers, I don't have that kind of reservoir. So depending on the size of the container, I have to water more frequently. These larger containers, I would water usually maybe at least every 2 to 3 days. The smaller containers, I would water often once a day, especially when it's hot out here like it is today. It's going to be 90 degrees. This container will dry out. No matter how much water I put in here now, because it's I've set up the container to be draining well, it'll drain out. And as long as I'm not saturating it several times a day, if I only do this once a day, I guarantee by tomorrow it will be ready to water it again. So with container gardening, and depending on the size of your containers, I feel that I have to water more often. I have to water that on a daily schedule with some of that. Let me tell you a little bit about what makes this part of the garden different. You know, these look like they're raised beds, but there is an issue going on here that makes this a little bit challenging this year, different than what you would expect in a normal raised bed. And you'll see that I pull away from watering these smaller containers here. It's not that I'm worried about overwatering them. I could sit here with the hose for a long time, and then if I left it for the rest of the day, it would drain out, and I'm not worried that I would have overwatered them, because again, I've got good, really well draining potting soil in there, so I'm not concerned that I'm going to suffocate the roots, again, because I'm not doing that several times a day kind of thing. Reason that I'm only doing a limited amount of water in each one is time. I mean, I got to get this whole garden watered, and there's no reason to waste the water either. I mean, if you get to a point where you've already made the whole soil in the pot moist, and then the rest of the water is draining out the bottom, and you know, why waste that water and why spend the time doing that? Where I left off, or what I was mentioning or wanting to mention, is that what looks like an in-ground garden bed here, and it is in ground, underneath it is just the ground here, but the problem is up there on the other side of the fence, there's hedge, there's laurels and other kinds of hedge stuff, and then in that back corner there's this kind of thicket of filbert hazelnut tree, and then behind that is some more kind of bushes and hedges and trees and stuff, all just to kind of border neighbors' properties to keep them from looking at each other, that kind of stuff, right? And what I realized last year in preparation for having this bed growing, I had put a bunch of compost in here, but what's happened, and you may have seen this in my other video, is that a lot of the soil that I have in here is turned into thatch. And it's because the root systems from all of these other things are coming in here and using this up. And the other thing that leads to is that I can water this substantially. I could flood this and it will be dry by tomorrow. And because there's almost a never-ending sucking up of the water from the root systems and the thatch of the hedges that are just beyond my fence here. So it looks like I've got a clean bed here that is growing my stuff in it, but underneath what's happening is that it is supporting this bed. The nutrition in the water is actually supporting all the neighbors' hedgerows. It's not a terminal issue for this year's garden. I think that I'm growing enough, the stuff that I'm growing at the surface, I've got enough soil that's not affected by that with some nutrition, and obviously I'm watering, but it does mean that I'm having to water more than I otherwise would. If I didn't have that problem, then I could treat this, as I was mentioning, as more in-ground beds. I could water less often, I could build a reserve in there, but there's no building a reserve here. If you've ever tried planting near a tree line, you would see a similar issue there, that you can't really build a reserve in the ground there because the trees will just suck up all the moisture that you want to lay down there. You know, I could have built these beds differently. I could have, you know, put some kind of barrier down and made this kind of basically a semi-container, and that's probably what I'm going to do for next year, is that once this garden is done this season, I'll maybe dig down a little bit and either literally put containers, like maybe I'll just line this whole thing with stock tanks, or put a lining that basically makes this a virtual container that looks like it's an in-ground bed, but it's really a virtual container. So I'll do something like that, I think. But in the interim, while this looks like it's a regular in-ground bed, it's not, and that leads me to have to water this more often. Now, as I said, I expect this will be dry by tomorrow, no matter how much water I put down here, because the hedgerow will pull all the moisture out. It doesn't mean I have to water it tomorrow, because what I found, and I don't, this is where I'm kind of off in my own head. I don't know the science behind this, but what I found is that these plants don't actually need access to the water every single day. So if they've got a good watering today, and even if it's kind of dry tomorrow, I can not water tomorrow and they'll still be fine. And then as long as I get to the watering the next day, they'll be okay. So, but I'm not kidding. I mean, if you dig in this soil that I'm watering right now, tomorrow, it'll be dry as a bone, without question. So those are kind of my specific needs. I've got containers, and then I've got in-ground beds that are being monopolized by hedgerows on my fence line. And so that gives me kind of some unique and different challenges when it comes to watering. So maybe from thinking about my setup, it may make sense to you why I'm not doing kind of the whole deep watering routine. In my large garden, I did try that and was experimenting with it. I never fully mastered it, but the concept made sense to me in that when I had the larger garden with lots of in-ground beds and they weren't next to hedge lines and stuff like that. So I think that's something in your garden setup, if it makes sense for you to look into, kind of, you know, does it make sense to water deeply less often than more frequently? I will propose a different theory on that, though, which is I don't think all plants are the same in terms of where they root. Like these strawberries, for example, they tend to have, from my perspective, they tend to have more surface roots. So I think if you're letting the surface dry out because you're deep watering and you're expecting your plants to then grow roots deep down into the soil to tap into the reserves, I think that strategy might be risky depending on the types of plants you're growing and what. But I haven't really seen much discussion on that. Certainly haven't seen anything in the literature or the authorities suggesting that I would be right about that point. I think when you have planted new things, and that's another issue, is that if you're in a small garden like me and you're constantly planting new things, and I'm planting everywhere because I interplant things, then a new plant to get established usually does need more frequent watering. Expecting it to tap into reserves deeper down into the soil doesn't totally make sense. Just planted a start in the ground, it's going to need watering daily for at least a few days, usually. That's another issue in terms of why I may end up watering beds all the time instead of just deep watering once in a while, is because I don't have lots of established perennials here where I'm watering established plants. I'm always watering new stuff on a regular basis. So that's another consideration. Again, just my own pontification on that issue, not a scientific or authoritative conclusion. Why don't I use drip? What's the Could I use drip? Why don't I use a drip system? I could use drip system. That meet my goals that I outlined at the beginning of this in terms of keeping containers moist and dealing with the amount of water that this garden might mean, because you can adjust the volume of water that you're putting down with a drip system. So I could achieve my goals with a drip system in terms of keeping the plants watered. That's where the laziness factor comes in, because the reality for, I think, a drip system, that kind of thing, in my mind, works when you can leverage. It has the most benefits. Well, first off, let's say, the actual benefits to the plants. It has certain benefits to the plants that have nothing to do with how it benefits me personally. So in terms of my time and how I go about watering. So the benefits to the plants, when you're watering like this, I'm putting a lot of water down here with the hose. A lot of it ends up running off or running through. Obviously all of the water that I put into this container, for example, is not accessed by the strawberry plant because a lot of it's running through. If it's already got moisture, it's already moist all the way through the pot, then the strawberry already has what it needs at the moment. If I wanted the strawberry to have access to that volume of water, drip system would actually be better because it would do it over time, and so the plant would have the chance to take it up over time. It would keep the soil moist, and then the plant would actually have a chance to take up more water over that period. So that would be the argument in favor of using a drip system for the optimal benefit of your plants. And I believe that, but I think that the discussion that suggests that setting up drip systems are easy, or you set them up and then you put them on timers and then you don't ever have to worry about watering again, that part doesn't really fit with me, or it doesn't really jive with my personal experience. And I think it comes back to the fact that I'm always planting new things and that I'm always moving stuff around. So with drip systems, you have a big long line and then you have emitters, and the emitters are designed to be put into to basically be set up where you have your plants. But my plants are in different places every year, and sometimes they're in different places throughout the season. And that means that I would be out here playing Legos or connectors with my drip system. Believe me, I've done this before, in decades past. I'd be out here playing with the connectors and everything on a regular basis just to kind of make sure everything stayed zoned. So I'd be constantly troubleshooting, am I keeping every zone watered? So I would turn it on, I would think that I have it fully covered, and then I would not have it fully covered, or there would be some plant that isn't, and I'd have to go exception handling. And by the time you inspect everything, determine where the exceptions are, and you do the exception handling, in a small garden, I found that I'm not spending dramatically less time than I would just hand watering like this with a hose. By the way, I'm hand watering with a hose right now, but depending, if I need to do targeted watering, I don't necessarily drag the whole hose out. So I would classify what I do as hand watering, but it's either with the hose or the watering can. So I've got mini watering cans, and I'll often water with a watering can because it's just easier to move a watering can around the garden if I only have one thing to water at that moment for some reason than it is for me to move the whole 100-foot hose around the garden. I think there's a scale issue to when using an automated system is actually more efficient. I don't think, from my experience, it doesn't feel more efficient in terms of my time and effort. It's probably more efficient, as I discussed, it's probably more efficient in terms of the plant's intake of the water, which is a good thing. But I find it just very frustrating to constantly be going around error handling, exception handling on a drip system throughout the entire season. And setting it up, when I've done this in the past, setting it up for a garden this size, it would take me, several days to get it totally set up and all the connectors in the right place. And then, like I said, they still wouldn't be in the right place. And then I'd be error handling the entire season and still coming out with the hose to get the spots that the drip system was missing. And it's probably fun the first time when you set it up and you get it all automated, and it's kind of cool. It's a little kind of engineering construction project, and feels good to do stuff like that sometimes. So I encourage people to go ahead and try it. But me, having done it before, I find this to be way easier in a small garden. It's not efficient water usage, so I'm probably wasting water here. probably. I can almost say most definitely I've got some water waste happening here compared to what would happen if I had a drip system. I would not waste as much water. So I am trading off water cost and some water wasting for what I'm able to do in terms of time. The other thing about hand watering my garden, and in the heat, when it's 9 degrees like that, this is a daily activity. I may choose to just skip over things that are still plenty of water. And by the way, how I know that is I just do the finger test. So I put my finger in places and check and see, okay, at what point do I feel moisture? In this pot, for example, which was watered 2 days ago, I feel no moisture. I'm all the way down to my knuckle there and I feel no moisture at all. Okay, so that needs watering for sure. So essentially, if I'm down here and I don't feel any water, if I don't feel any dampness, if I'm down there on my finger, then all the way down to here in my finger in the soil, then definitely needs water. If I'm right here and I feel some if I don't feel dampness here, but I do feel some dampness here, then I might go ahead and water if I know that in terms of timing, it may be a minute before I can get back out and water again, but I don't have to. I can wait. So kind of here is kind of my buffer zone. Here, if it's not damp here, it's not tragic yet. Here, I'm in my buffer zone, but if it's not damp by the time I get to here, then generally feel I need to water. And again, I can completely soak this. I can make in the pot like this, I can make the container like this, I can make this. All the soil in here totally damp based on experience. Again, I can't see it drain out the bottom, but I know based on experience the amount of water that would essentially create a sense of moisture throughout the pot. And I can come back 2 days from now and it'll be dry just like I saw. That was watered 2 days ago. Did have a 90-degree day yesterday as well as today, so we are dealing with more heat right now. So I mean, that's the thing with the drip systems is you can do different things to program. You can get fancy with your automations to program how it responds to various weather. So I mean, if you see, I do a lot of I'm not a programmer. I do financial work for small businesses, but I do things that are based on programs and automations and processes and things, all that kind of stuff in my work life. I don't want to come out to the garden and be doing a lot of programming on, okay, if then that. I don't want to do a big if exercise in the garden. That's not where my head wants to be when I'm in the garden. I want to look at things, have a sense for what I think needs to be done, do them. It's more hands-on. I could do a lot more with automation and technology. Choose not to, because I do that in my work life. I don't need to do that in my garden life. Not to make you think I don't use technology at all. I've been going crazy with AI systems and figuring out how it can help me, inform me, speed me up in how I do things in the garden kind of thing. But it's still, I don't want to lose. I'm not doing it in how can I create an AI or a robot that would do all the gardening for me so that I just have a done garden, because I think most of you will relate to this. The gardening, the garden, the spending time on the porch looking at the garden is like such a micro piece, such a small minority of what I get out of the activity, right? Showing it off to other people is part of it. Sure, yeah, having a done garden I can show off to other people is definitely part of it, but still, that is still a micro piece to it. It's a little bit more in my life because I do these videos and I'm showing off to you guys, so more of my gardening is spent on showing it off to it. But if you enjoy the activity of gardening the way I do, then it's a lot about actually just doing it, right? So there's no part of me that wants to just do it all with technology. I want to use technology to enhance my experience where I can, but I still want to have the experience. And that gets into the other benefit I get from hand watering this small garden, because I can, given it's small enough, I can actually, the time makes sense that I could do this. I basically get to look at and inspect every plant, every part of the garden. Not every plant necessarily, I shouldn't go that far, but I'm seeing every part of the garden daily, looking it over as I'm watering. I have to be mindful about that because you can just mindlessly water and do other things, be on a phone call or talk to people on a YouTube video or whatever, and not really be paying attention to what you're doing. But it does put you in the place where hand watering everything like this does put me in a place where I can be paying attention to every zone of this garden, every piece of this garden, and seeing what's going on. And I like that aspect of it as well. One thing you'll see I'm doing, you can't see it, see I'm watering off the side of the wall here. That's because if you were over there looking this way, you would see along the wall all the pots I have on the west wall here. And I'm watering those pots from this angle here, from just up here. So I'm just watering those pots as I go down here. So what I do, I came down this way, and so now I'm going to go back down this way. I'm going to water all the pots on this row, and you'll see some of these are smaller pots, shallower pots, which means that they're ones more likely to need water every day. And then I'm watering the pots that are kind of on the wall below them as I go through here. So I'll keep bringing you with me as we go through this. So if I had a larger garden, I kind of excused my not using drip with the fact that my garden's so small. But if I had a larger garden, would I use drip with an automated system? I don't know. I might rethink it, but I can tell you I didn't when I did have the larger garden. So when I had the larger garden on a half-acre property before, didn't use drip. I didn't water by hand manually. I did water, I would say I watered manually, so to speak, but not by hand like this, unless I was just supplementing things. So what I did there is I did overhead watering, which is another kind of, it's an old-fashioned way to water and something that is not really considered in that often in today's gardening circles. Sprinklers. I just set up lots of overhead sprinklers in zones, and I didn't really automate them. I had them in zones that could be turned on from a central location. Because again, I'm not growing a garden and then not out here in the garden. I'm out here, I'm a gardener, so I'm out in the garden every day. Where automation is obviously nice is if you're leaving town during the growing season, have an automated system to accommodate that. So like what happens now if I leave town and this has to be watered every day or at least every other day, really every day for some of these things, I have to find a friend or somebody or whatever to come over and do what I'm doing right now, over and water this every day. And they're not going to do it as good as I would have done it, or they're going to miss things or whatever, but it's going to keep the garden alive, and then I can get back to it when I'm back home, right? That's the practical situation. Setting up a complex automated system for the one period of time that I may be out of town in the summer, not worth it. And really, I try to avoid being out of town in the summer because that's go time in my Pacific Northwest garden. And so, I'm a gardener, so I want to be here. My life isn't just me and my life. I've got other family members who aren't as into gardening necessarily. So people in my life that I might visit. So I don't have complete choice over that. So sometimes I may have to go somewhere in the summer, but that's not my ideal. Normally I would rather do my vacationing or traveling later in the fall, or when it's not beautiful and nice here in the Pacific Northwest where I live. Fall or winter when it's colder here, and nothing's really growing much in the garden. My responsibilities and trying to keep stuff up in the garden to enjoy this activity, that's a great time for me to go somewhere warm with a beach. I've had the luxury of that because we didn't have kids, so we weren't revolving around a school schedule or a typical kind of when kids are in and out of school. That may change. I have a 3-year-old now, so maybe later I will have no choice but to do vacations when school holidays are. I hope not, because that's when everything's crowded. I have these shallow troughs that are really meant for windows or deck hangers here that I've set up to perch on my wall here. These are very shallow, so they need to be watered at least once a day. Ideally, if I were to come out here, I would water them maybe twice a day. They would be a rare exception. I don't usually have things I need to water twice a day. I don't actually water them twice a day. They suffer a little bit when it's hot outside. This pot over here is a shallow pot and it's suffering. That's the other thing is, depending on the size of your pot and how many things you have in it, more plants in it. You know, you've seen me stuff my pots with, you know, one pepper and multiple flowers and things. That's going to need more water because those, you know, there's more wanting that water, or it's going to use the water more quickly, I should say. We've covered this west side, so we're going to head over there towards the cherry tree. Well, here in the cherry tree beds, I honestly haven't quite figured out the watering cadence because I'm not sure with these stock tanks how well they're holding the water. The soil in there might be particularly loose, causing needing to be watered more often. This stuff is, I'm feeling a little moisture at my fingertip, but that means that this bed definitely needs to be done. You know what I was mentioning earlier, gardening near trees, the bushes or the trees and various things will suck up the moisture from the soil around it. I actually don't find that to be the case with this cherry tree. The cherry tree roots are not creating a thatch. They're not sucking up the moisture around. I don't know why that is. Maybe because it's otherwise sickly and it's not doing well, or maybe it's older enough that it's really established a root system farther down. I don't know. I don't know why it hasn't done that, but it's a good thing. I can grow all this stuff around it. I can use it for some shade, and I don't really have a problem with creating a thatch or sucking up all the moisture from the rest of my garden that's there. All my cherries had worms in it, but I don't see any wormholes here. I think this one might be safe. It's a little bit sourish though. So I'm gonna start by watering the stock tanks. I usually go about halfway from this side and then I hit it from the other side after that. This lettuce needs to come out. It's bolting there. See, that's, as I'm watering, I see stuff like that. I've got a lettuce there that needs to come out. I was talking earlier about, I don't think I finished my discussion of using overhead sprinklers at the older garden that had in-ground beds and raised beds. It wasn't mostly containers like this one here. What I did there is I just set up zones. So, you know, it was a big enough garden. I had like 8 or 9 different sprinkler zones, and then I would just turn them on. And so when I was out in the garden, I would turn each zone on for half an hour or so. I mean, water pressure is an issue. So in a garden that size, I couldn't have all the sprinkler zones running at the same time because there wouldn't be enough water pressure for them all to run across the entire yard at the same time, the entire property. So I would turn one on at a time, and you know, it'd be the area I wasn't working in. So I'd turn the area I wasn't working in on, do whatever thing I was doing in the garden, and then I would coordinate what area I was working in the garden around watering each zone throughout the day. And I might have the overhead sprinklers running for 20 minutes to half hour, depending on what the zone was. And I mean, these weren't like, well, it depends. Some of them were pretty low to the ground and they were covering a very limited area with the overhead sprinklers, so they were very focused. Some of them were higher up, covering larger areas. But again, from a time efficiency, you know, again, a lot of water wasted because there was water going into paths and things like that. But from a time efficiency, it was way better than constantly troubleshooting a very targeted system that only watered exactly where the plants were and exactly where the beds were. I think though, I mean, there's a happy medium. I think you can kind of set up when you talk about a drip system, there's the drip line, and then you have the drip emitters, which are kind of your classic. It is emitting a drip of water a certain rate over time, but you also have these little sprinkler heads you can put on it, other kinds of different emitters you can put on it. So you can compromise. It doesn't have to be like a complete just nothing but overhead sprinklers like I was doing, or a drip system. You can have kind of a drip line that you set up, and then you can do different things in different zones. And I can imagine myself wanting to try that again if I was in a bigger garden with more permanency to what I was doing. Might set up more infrastructure like that. Okay, I'm gonna move this around the corner. You can see this echinacea in a pot. I didn't even know if the echinacea would work in a container. I have it in one of my decorated ice cream buckets here. You can't see the ice cream bucket, but you can see the echinacea. It's actually working. The leaves are drooping a bit. I find echinacea in particular is one of those things that kind of does well with drought conditions. It likes to be abused a bit, it seems, similar to lavender. Reason that the leaves are drooping on that one though is I missed watering that and hadn't watered it probably in over 2 days, and that's one of those, that size pot with that size plant in it probably needs watering every day. This is a really big container here, so I mean, I could get away with only watering this a couple times a week, probably once a week if it wasn't so hot. Another echinacea over here in a small container, doing well because I keep it well watered and fed. You can't see what I'm doing over here. I'm just watering the bed over here from this side. I have a big lettuce over here. I told my wife I didn't think we had any more lettuce, so another thing when you're out here, you see stuff like that. Now I'll text my wife and say, actually there is one more lettuce in the garden. One of the frustrations as a vegetable gardener, everybody wants tomatoes in April and May and lettuce in June, July, and August. Like, it doesn't work that way. I may just turn the hose on with a small drip on it and put it next to my apple trees today. I don't usually directly water my apple trees. I just let nature run its course, and the runoff from everything else I do kind of give them some moisture over time. But with as hot as it's been, and because I've been building this retaining wall, disturbing their roots and everything, maybe it'd be nice to give them some extra love right now. Might be in order. You know, that gets back to kind of my thoughts on drip. Again, if I had a really big garden, lots of in-ground stuff, would I go back to just doing overhead, or would I do some drip? I think what I might do, at the very least, is I might set up drip for the perennials. I complain about drip actually not being that efficient for me, constantly having to rework the lines for all my annuals. Say, well, then it's not an either or. Again, you can compromise. You can do a combination of both. You could do some overhead for the annuals, or manual for annuals and places where you've got new plants, and you could set up drip for your perennials, or things that are in there long term. Most of the pots along here do have to be watered daily. Some of these are small enough they could actually use being watered twice a day, but I don't have the patience for that, so they only get a daily watering, and they just need to survive, and then they can thrive again when it cools down. Share a couple things I learned about watering containers from the research. They actually were suggesting that untreated terracotta pots were not the best, because the moisture, when you water, the moisture is wicking out by the terracotta, is wicking the moisture out to the side of the pot and then out into the world. So I thought that was interesting. It then went on to say, a glazed terracotta is not necessarily better, because the opposite can happen. It seals the water in and can drown your plants. Ironically, or maybe just makes sense by the serendipity of what I was doing for convenience in terms of a lot of my pots. I have a lot of ceramic pots. I have a lot of different kinds of pots. I like the look of terracotta, but the literature did suggest that a fiberglass or these kind of synthetic pots actually were the best for dealing with moisture in terms of not wicking it out and being able to drain it out easily. These more kind of fiberglass types of containers, which a lot of the kinds of pots that I get from Costco, that's what they are. And then these ice cream buckets that I'm using, well, they're food grade, so I know they're safe to grow food stuff in, or I guess I don't know, but I believe they are. And otherwise, they're plastic, they're not fiberglass, but I think they kind of share some of the properties that the literature was suggesting are great for having for containers. So I think I just lucked out by serendipity that a lot of the containers I use are considered the optimal way to do containers. Once I get this far out, I've almost stretched the end of the hose, and I do have another kind of water hose over there for the potting bench, so sometimes I can just pull that out and use that on this side if I wanted to, but I'm not doing that today because I made the statement to you that I could use this 100-foot hose across the entire garden, and I wanted to show you it was true. Let me come in here and check. Give it the finger test. So that's nice. There's a lot of fungus gnats in here. Gotta clear that out. The soil is in the buffer zone, so it can be watered. It doesn't have to be watered for these tomato plants here. I'll go ahead and water them because I want to keep their moisture nice and even. Well, it's a few days later now, and the garden has gone from blistering heat to a little Portland rain. So I suppose the watering job has been handed back to the weather for the moment. Maybe that's the point. Watering the garden isn't about one perfect system. It's about paying attention. In this driveway garden with containers, shallow pots, new plantings, and hedge roots stealing moisture from the beds, I have to respond to what's actually happening out here, not just what the standard advice says. Hand watering may not be the most efficient system, but it keeps me connected to the garden. I see what's wilting, what's bolting, what needs harvesting, and what can wait. Thanks for gardening with me, and I'll see you in the next one.